Hi, my name is Ryan Hooper, and today I have just paid a hobo named Rowdy Moore $5 to join me in this talk of the Aztecs versus the Greeks in comparison. We will be starting off with the monarchies and their roles, the government functions, their economies, religion, their warfare styles, and the domestic life between the two empires. Although they seem very different and they are both brought down in completely different means, we will be examining the comparable features. Starting off with the monarchies, we have how the kings interacted with their societies. In ancient Greece, the kings were high on the religious scale, and they would practice every single religious custom to the on the spot. Whereas in the Aztecs, the kings would mostly focus on the innovations of the population, such as if a merchant were to have a stall full of items, it would be the job of the king to purchase every item that the merchant had to make sure his family didn't go hungry for the night. Additionally, both empires would have the nobility children associating with the king in a form of gaining power, as well as what's the word I'm looking for? As a form of blackmail. So that way, if the parents were to have disobedience, it would risk their children being murdered.
Like in the Aztecs, the king was more of a not really I guess it would be a king because kings were normally used as uh, your bit of your gods normally,
Right.
which is what we see in many cultures, including the Greek. While it kind of came about later on, it is an idea that still lives on in many kingdoms, where the kings basically had royal blood or godlyhood blood.
Yeah, and in the
But it seems like the
no, I was going to say in the
it
Aztec.
seems more like the Greek kings were not really. It seems like the Greek kings were more leaders than just important people living.
Yeah, mostly just a figurehead, and they use justification that the gods gave them position. Whereas in the Aztecs, the kings were
Right,
not above the law.
right. The kings for Aztecs were more of just important people, and people that more of just a religious prophet. It seems like, whereas Greek kings were, like I said, actual kings, leaders, people that were in charge.
Yeah. And all right, I think we did enough on that. Let's talk about the economy styles. The Greeks relied heavily on the trade just because their soil was not that great for crops, and well, I don't really remember what else the Greeks had to do. So, Rowdy, what was your take on that?
You want me to start?
Yeah, yeah.
So the Greeks had a massive empire to trade goods to. And not only did the Greeks trade goods to themselves, I am pretty sure they also traded with other empires.
Oh, very commonly, I'm pretty sure that the Greeks also had a few historical records that they were trading with the Chinese as well.
Right. Hell, oh, my bad. We have seen Greek currency be everywhere. People are still finding Hellenistic coins all throughout Europe and Asia.
Oh, and there's also a entire like cities being discovered in Persia as well.
And then we know the trading paths that the Greeks had were still in use well after the Greeks were gone. Whereas Aztecs, their trade just wouldn't have been as large and as influential as the Greeks.
Well, all right. Well, why don't we talk about the religion of the two empires? I'm pretty sure they have a lot in common. Um, if I
Right,
remember correctly, the Greeks were polytheistic, and if they were to do such great deeds, they become a demigod, right?
right, in some periods. I mean, it was also the idea that Zeus had pretty much was the father of like nearly everybody with how much he got around. But the Greeks, they put importance on their gods. They had a god for everything. They used their gods to explain everything.
Right. The
If a
gods were.
man suddenly died out on the street, it was because he upset Helios, the sun god, and the sun god had shot an arrow at him, killing him. It was just a way to explain everything. But they had a lot of gods to the point where even the Romans adapted the Greek gods after the Greeks were gone.
Yeah, and just like the Romans, Greeks, and the Aztecs, every one of them would capture the gods of the lands that they captured. And the Aztecs, if you had a foreign god, they would build a monument to them in their capital. I think Chanochukchek. I know I mispronounced that.
But as but we also see each city worship or each Greek state worship a different god. For example, Athens was huge. Athens
Or Athena.
loved the god, yes, Athena with the olive tree, and whereas Sparta is usually Ares, you know.
Yeah. Um, However, what we do know for certain is that the Greek gods were viewed as very angry people, and that if you try to do really good at their tasks, they would probably smite you down because they saw you as a usurper. And the Aztecs, on the other hand, saw sacrifices necessary to feed their gods, so that way they wouldn't destroy the world. Because they saw us, I believe, in the eighth. Let me check my notes real quick. No, it was actually the fifth sun. They believed it was they must keep the sun fed with blood in order to continue operating it by making human sacrifices. Meaning the Aztecs needed to keep conquering the world to save humanity from being exterminated by the sun not functioning. They just saw it as a necessary human evil, just like how the Greeks saw their warfare as well. They saw it as a necessary evil condition of
We did also see them do sacrifice, but a lot of times it was animal or it was sacrifice of goods, not necessarily human life,
right.
which it was sometimes, but not as frequent as the Aztecs.
Right, and because the Aztecs gets using humans, I guess that's a great time to talk about the warfare. The Aztecs saw war as a great honor of passage and a great way how to appease the gods. If they could capture more people, they could raise up the ranks of nobility even. Whereas the Greeks, as I said earlier, they just saw it as a necessary evil. Their warfare was completely different from each other, such as the Aztecs would usually commit flower wars, which is only against other people who claim to be Aztec culturally, and they would, well, pretty much just get into an open location and agree to fight each other at a certain time in a certain place. It was usually ritual engagement or it was uh, politics, pretty much.
Right. The gentleman's warfare.
Pretty much. But the only downside to it was really that if one side started beating the other side, they would start fighting a little bit more dirty. And what people don't really understand is that Aztecs really did fight to kill. It's just that Mesopotamia ideology at the time, I believe not Mesopotamia, Middle America philosophy at the time was to capture the opponent. It's just that the Aztecs pretty much scaled it up to 11.
Right, and then if you had won, you would enslave your enemy, correct?
Yeah. On the bright side of being a slave in the Aztecs, if you weren't, used as a sacrifice, was that you were typically treated better than most other places. And if you had a family, they wouldn't be enslaved as well. If you were, born as a slave, you would be born as a free man. Um, which slavery was considered as a form of punishment, captured in war, or you volunteered to pay off your debts. Just like in ancient Greece, where if you were born in the mines, if you're a mine slave, then your life was brutal. But if you were a craftsman, tradesman, banker, you would enjoy pretty much relative independence, where you could even sometimes pay off your fees to become a free man. But that's a digression, and we should go back to the warfare, I guess. The Greeks, on the other hand, they typically saw ranged warfare as cowardice, and they would usually opt for heavier armed hoplites to roam the battlefields with their long spears. I think they were known as phalanxes.
And then we can also see the Greeks go through a larger campaign because they would have had to march across the empire,
Right.
and if they could have, fought other Greek states. But we just normally see a better trained military with the Greeks.
Very disciplined as well, and I believe it was their culture as well that if you were to abandon the combat and abandon your position, the phalanx, that was seen as the most dishonorable thing you could do.
As well as you also had a bunch of soldiers that once you did retire, you can go, you basically lived the high life after you did your military service.
Yeah, very similar to what the Aztecs had as well. But we'll talk about that later. What is it? The main difference in equipment, I guess you could say, was that the Greeks were able to function more in the mountains and city environments as well as more open fields, whereas the Aztecs lived in more jungle areas and hill zones, meaning that they had to be more lightweight. So you would never really see a armored, I guess, Aztec person, soldier.
Ironically enough, though, the Greek armor had the Aztecs actually had armor, their defeat by the Spanish wouldn't have been as bad because
Yeah.
with the Spanish, their muskets. That
Um,
was kind of the downfall of the Aztecs.
yeah, I mean, the Aztec weaponry was not designed against armor. It's mostly against the fleshier objects. I believe there was one report from a Spaniard, conquistador, who said that the Aztec club was able to cut his horse's neck in half in one, swing.
It's kind
Whereas,
of funny, or funny or ironic, considering that the Greeks, which were lived hundreds of years before the Aztecs, had armor and had basically started what would be the downfall of the Aztecs
that is a
in
little
completely
ironic.
two different part of the world.
Well, I guess the main problem too would be also resources. I mean, I guess the Aztecs wouldn't really have had much iron or access to it at
Right.
least.
Because the Greek did have good metalworking.
But I do remember that the Greek armor was very lightweight and you could easily crack it open, which I guess that was their downfall. But it has improved a lot since then, I suppose. Oh, well, I
Right.
guess since we're talking about different topics, we mentioned the elderly earlier. I remember we did say that the Greeks were treated their elderly and the veterans with great respect. I do know that the Aztecs also did the same thing. In fact, they treated their elderly with so much respect that they wouldn't be used as sacrifices and slaves.
Not really anything I can think of. It's just other than the fact that it's usually the opposite, where what you think of sacrifice. Usually, you think it would be an older person, but
That is true. But I
the
guess
fact
they
that
did respect that
oh,
they lived long enough lives to manage to get to that position in life. I mean, after all, Aztec life was very hard. And if I do remember correctly, is that the elderly Aztecs, I think it was considered 55 as elderly, were able to drink in public and go on drunken rants, which both of them were, considered very big no-nos. If I remember correctly, the Aztec nobility, if they were, intoxicated in public, would be strangled to death in their private homes, and if it was a citizen who were to get drunk in public, would be strangled to death in public. However, if it was a person over the age of 55, they could get drunk in public without any consequence.
very interesting. Don't know if the Greeks had anything similar.
Well, I guess that is a contrast. Well, I guess the last thing we really could talk about was the tribunal states that they owned. I know that the Aztecs tribunal states were mostly just economic and it was a mutual trade agreements, whereas,
The Greek ones would have been religion and economic,
yeah,
but different cultures were definitely more present with the Greek states.
I do know that the Greeks also struggled a lot with their internal stabilities, I guess, because of the cultural differences as well. Such as after Alexander the Great died, and they didn't have a successor. Many of the successor states split off, and they were having warfare with each other.
Which
Which
I believe is where you see the Germanic states. So
I believe it was the I guess for the Aztecs, you could see that they didn't really care enough to bother with the tribunal states either, and they would actually use their religion to test the loyalty of the tribunal states. They didn't really care if you practiced their religion or not. If you were to offer to build the pyramids with the Aztecs and you said no, you would be seen as unloyal, and they would probably put you high up on the crap list on who they wanted to kill.
right, which one thing we can say about both cultures or both people or both groups of people is both did build amazing architects or amazing monuments that still stand even to today.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. And well, I guess you could also say it was very incredible how they were able to make it too. I mean, putting all those big rocks together and all that architecture up into one small
It
space
is
and one
still a
mountain.
mystery on how they did it today.
Oh yeah, I mean, and if we were due to
We have our guess, but it's still mind-boggling to believe that people that we didn't even think to have like anything close to the technology we have today to be able to do those impressive feats.
yeah, I mean, imagine having to pillage up those big rocks on those mountains. It'd be absolutely insane.
Right.
And the fact that their concrete was so good that it still holds up today with such minimal maintenance as well is also an astounding feature as well for
Right.
both the Aztecs and the Greeks. Speaking of the architecture, I do know that the Aztec capital was built upon an island in the middle of a lake, and all the roads were riverways, so they had to
Did
walk
not know
across
that.
bridges. Yeah, it was instead of having to have walls around their city, they just had to, you know, build more bridges.
Interesting.
Well, I guess that's all we had to discuss about today. Thank you for listening in our conversation. And again, this is Rowdy Moore and Ryan Hooper. Thank you for listening to our talk.